So it's time for what am I sowing and growing in October, standard video series, and what I'm going to start off with is just look at what I'm growing. So basically the seedling progress from the September sowings and a few from the August sowings, but not very many. I've got my iPad here, so if I'm looking down, that's what I'm looking at. So I'm starting off with white Lisbon, spring onions from last month, and they did really well. They're all growing really great. And they're about the right size now for interplanting with the lettuces that I'm sowing this month. So that's the way I like it. I like the spring onions to be really big when I interplant them into the lettuce beds and the spinach beds. The chard that I did at the beginning of last month, that's now planted out in the polytunnel and it's looking pretty good. Quite happy with that. And the radishes that I did in the beginning of September, we're harvesting. We're planting those out now and they're looking nice as well. The ones we did in August we're harvesting and they're great, as well as the turnips that we did in August as well. We're harvesting those, and the turnips that I did this month are pretty close to planting out and just trying to find some space for them. That is a bit of a challenge right now. The Grenoble red that I did at the beginning of the month, that's looking great. It's probably just about a week away from being planted out, and that's ideal now because all the lettuces in the back garden are finished. We've just got one and a bit bed on the allotment of lettuces, and we're going to need more than that once we get into October and definitely in November. Almost all my field beans are now up. In fact, they're pretty much ready for their first harvest. And you harvest them when they're young, so when the shoots are quite small. If you don't do that, the plants get too big and leggy, start getting knocked over in the wind and all that sort of thing. And the leaves get, not really great eating quality. But when you harvest them when they're young, when they're a nice tight tip, then they're great. So what else? Oh yeah, cabbages. Cabbages from August are planted out. Cabbages from September are nowhere near ready to be planted out, so probably they'll actually get planted out perhaps in November, something like that. Just basically when any space kind of opens up on the allotment or in the garden. And right now I don't really have very much space, so they might not get planted at all, but who knows. I mean, it's always worth, I think, sowing spares so you don't have any ground unplanted going into winter. I like always living roots in the soil at all times. Next up, lost my place. Right, next up is the Cabbages, and that's basically the same state. So I mean that actually won't get planted out until February, and it'll go interplanted into polytunnel beds. Basically, I'm just harvest sort of like every third lettuce or something like that to make space, pop it in, and it'll basically grow whilst the lettuce is underplanted underneath it, and we'll harvest that in May just before we put the tomatoes in. Same with the cauliflowers. They're still little plants, quite a long way away from being potting on. What have we got else? Spinach. Spinach is doing really well actually this year, a bit too well, a bit ahead of where I want it to be because I can't plant it yet, because the peppers are still giving us such an amazing harvest. We've still got loads and loads of green peppers, and we're harvesting those and ripening those as quickly as we possibly can. Got lots of mouldy ripe apples underneath them to maximise the amount of ethylene gas that they're being exposed to, and they are ripening rather really well, but we've still got loads of green peppers, so I don't think we'll finish harvesting peppers until about the third week in October, but we'll start clearing one bed every week between now and the third week in October. And so the spinach that I've got has to come ready, like one batch next week, another batch the week after, then another batch the week after that. And my timings, because it's done so well, are slightly off. I'm going to have to sow one extra batch and give one away because it's just a little bit too far ahead. Yeah, everything else is doing great. So that's September. Let's talk about October. Right, more spinach. Again, you know, as I said, I'm always sowing spares. This batch of spinach will probably go in a cold frame after something else finishes. I'm not quite sure what that something else will be, because we've got lots of different things that are kind of maturing at different rates, and some things just get wiped out by flea beetle or something like that. But right now, the most likely candidate is that it will follow the pak choi and the tatsoi, but we'll just have to see. And if not, I just give it away, so it's no kind of real great loss to me. It takes a few seconds to sow a tray of spinach and a few pence worth of compost, so I'm never really shy about having spares. Peas for microgreens. So this is the time now where our beans are starting to finish outside. Probably got a couple of weeks left if harvest from those. So now is when I start doing a tray of just what I normally go for, something like a mange 2p, really nice and sweet. So I'll do a tray of those every 3 weeks, and they just sit on the windowsill, and we just snip them off with scissors and use them in all sorts of different things like soups and stir fries and salads and things like that. And they're great. It just gives you that taste of summer peas and beans all the way through winter. Yeah, we like to do that. So then it comes down to the garlic. Now, normally I don't want to sow my garlic this early, but I just do a few in module trays to get them started nice and early for green garlic. Now, I've got a chapter in my ebook all about growing garlic and green garlic, and there'll be a link to that in the description below. But basically, any garlic that I'm doing right now is just for green garlic. That'll be harvested immature. I'm not really bothered about it getting desiccated or damaged by really cold weather, because it will be grown under cover at this time. Now, later on in this sowing guide, later on in the month, in October and late October, I sow a lot more garlic outside, but actually only in sheltered spots. If it's not a sheltered spot, I'd rather have it small, which means I'd rather sow it in November. Then I'll only have small garlic plants in winter, less likely to get damaged by the wind, less likely to get desiccated or damaged by the cold. So that's basically my strategy with garlic anyway, is shade indoors, can start it now. Not shady, sheltered spots, you can do it middle, sort of to the end of October, and you know, exposed locations, better off in November. Really cold places, probably better off in spring. And I do it in spring as well, but mainly again for a successional harvest of green garlic. So then I come on to my brassicas. Now I've got 3 different types of brassicas that I sow right now. These will overwinter in small pots, and they'll get planted out in sort of February, March time in low tunnels on my allotment. And quite a nice range here. Brussels sprouts, which I grow for the leaves. We find that Brussels sprouts sown now or early next year, so that they mature in about May time, are actually superior to spring cabbage. They taste better, they're healthier, you get a lot less damage by slugs, and they're really prolific, and they give you a great harvest if they don't go to seed, which is just a slight risk, but it's, you know, generally speaking, if you use the varieties I recommend, fill basket, very rarely go to seed, and they just give you this amazing harvest all the way through May, June and July. I generally take them out by the end of July. I do sometimes get actual sprouts on them as well, and I get loads of lovely sprout tops, and of course masses and masses of sprout leaves. So I think they're an amazing crop. I've got videos all about doing this, and a chapter in my ebook all about doing that, and I'll put a link to that in the description as well. And then my favourites for calabrese and cauliflowers, and you know, I've got quite a few successions of these. I don't want them to all come at the same time. I want them separated by a few weeks. I just can't eat like masses of calabrese all at once. So I want a harvest that starts maybe towards the end of April and then finishes towards the sort of middle of May. By then I need the beds for other things. So I generally do about 6 in each sowing, maybe plant about 4 or 5 or something like that each week, going into sort of February time. And yeah, so that's those. Then Brighton lettuce, I actually got one batch of that and it's just not germinated at all, so I've got to do another batch of it. I don't really know what's going on with it because it's a good seed. I got it from Dobby's, but yeah, anyway, no luck with it so far. The reason I want this Brighton lettuce is because it's a really nice hardy lettuce. I want to grow it as a head lettuce so I can harvest it in sort of late December and January when my cut and come again lettuce is basically stalled in growth. So I don't want to harvest that cut and come again very hard. And so it's nice just to have some head lettuces just to sort of pick through that period, just to keep me going. Although I'm doing something else about that, but I'll do that in another video. Yeah, so then we've got garlic, green garlic, lots of successions of those. If you look at the descriptions on the entries in the sowing guide, which is linked in the description below, then you'll see why I've got multiple successions of some of these things. It's all described in here. Multiple successions of spinach and things like that. And then I'll sow some lettuces for overwintering. Now, touch and go, depends again on the weather as to whether it's best to do this in October or November. So I'll probably do it twice because I just don't mind sowing things and using them as spares or giving them away. But the reason I do this is because over winter, most of my lettuces are in the polytunnel. But what I like to do, because I've got beds coming free in late October, November time, is I like to plant some lettuces really late as really small plants. And they just overwinter as really small plants. They don't really grow very much, maybe double in size or something over a period of a couple of months. But because they're so small, they can stand really bad frosts and all that sort of thing. They're growing in low tunnels and coal frames, so they're getting protection. But the beauty of it is that come February time, they start growing. They've got a really good root system. They grow really fast, and I get them about 6 weeks earlier than I would if I started them in February. And I really like doing that because the lettuces in the polytunnel I'll be taking out, because in the polytunnel I want to get this early harvest of calabrese, beetroot, cauliflowers, and all sorts of leeks and all sorts of other things. So the polytunnel environment is just not that necessary for lettuces, but it is necessary to get those early harvests of those other things. So basically it just means I switch. The other reason I like starting these plants early, I suppose I'm starting them late really, but to get an early harvest, is because it allows me to start varieties that do really well in spring, but they don't do very well being harvested over winter. And so it allows me to get some of my favourite spring varieties really early. And so these are the ones I'll be eating in sort of April and May, early May. So that kind of 6-week period there, maybe a little bit earlier than that as well. So the varieties I'm doing here are Winter Density, which provides a really nice crunch to the salad mixes at a time when most of what I've got is oak leaf, which is not quite so crunchy, and Navara, which is one of my all-time favourite spring lettuces, so I want it as early as possible, and Grenoble Red, again another great spring lettuce. I will have that over winter, but as I said, it's in the polytunnel, and I'm clearing the polytunnle in that sort of February, March time period of lettuces, so I need these to take over. And that just ending with garlic. So that is pretty much it. That is what I'm sowing in October, and it will help, because it's fairly complicated getting all the timings right, to read the associated chapters in the individual growing guide section of my ebook, or the year-round growing guide section of my ebook. So I don't have all of the individual growing guides written right now, but I do have most of the year-round sowing guides, and that explains the logic of why I sow different things at different times, why I use different substitute crops at different times. For example, I don't grow radish for harvest in December and January and February. I have it now up until December, and I have it in March, but don't have it over winter. It just doesn't grow very well over winter. It doesn't taste very good over winter. And I'm not a mad keen on the winter radishes. So we grow ochre, for example, which we harvest in that winter period. It's very similar. It plays the same role in a great salad mix as a radish does, but it's really great for a winter harvest. So, and I've got loads of these sorts of substitutions. So for example, true spinach grows stalls in December and January and February. And so I generally like to have quite a lot of field beans tips ready for harvest at that time. I pick those during that period of time just to spare the spinach a little bit so I don't over harvest it. It just means I've got something just to complement really to the spinach. All sorts of things. There's loads of more stuff in the ebook which is just not practical to go through in a short video like this. So I'll draw this to a close, I think. It's been a great September. We've had some amazing September harvests. It's been really lovely. We did lose all of our tomato plants, but actually one of the things we did this year, which we've never done before, is we just took every single tomato off those plants over about a 7-day period, and I put them all in big wooden boxes, and I put loads of mouldy apples in those boxes as well, not touching the tomatoes. Mouldy apples give off loads of ethylene, much more than bananas. So basically they're really ripe apples that are just got a little patch of rot on them, which you can easily find, windfall apples basically. And at that point there's just so much ethylene coming off them. We've managed to ripen every single one of our tomatoes, so I don't know, 300 tomatoes, something like that. Not a single one didn't ripen. And so we've never managed to do that, even when we left our tomatoes in the ground until about the middle of October. We still had loads of green ones. So we've actually managed to harvest all of our tomatoes earlier than ever before. We've not lost any. So in a way, blight did us a favour, because it taught us there was no real point in leaving the tomatoes in the ground for all that time if we could manage to harvest them early, particularly all the ones that are going to be used for cooking sauces and things like that. And that meant, because we'd cleared all of those in early September, we had loads of space in the polytunnel, about a 6-week growing period. So in that 6-week growing period, we've grown loads of lettuce, we've grown loads of radish, we've grown turnips, we've grown all sorts of stuff, pak choy, tatsoi, all sorts. And that's been a massive bonus. I mean, it's a harvest that we weren't expecting to even get from the polytunnel. So I might even do that next year. I might clear my tomatoes a bit earlier, as I say, particularly all the ones that are going to be used for sauces. Maybe a few of the cherry tomatoes I might leave later, just for fresh tomatoes for salad mixes. But for anything that's going to be cooked, might as well just get it harvested and get the plants out and get something else in. And I did a video about that a few days ago. So there we go. My name's Steve. This is the Seaside Kitchen Garden and Allotment channel, and I'll see you soon.